It was late September 2019 when I went up north with three of my friends, Zach, Luis, and Jamal, for a weekend at a cabin Zach's uncle owned. It was about a 4-hour drive from where we lived in Fort Collins, Colorado, up into the woods near the Wyoming border, close to a tiny town called Encampment. I was 26 back then. We'd all met back in high school, and even though we'd taken different paths, jobs, college, and all that, we still made time for each other when we could. This cabin trip was supposed to be our way of closing out the summer before the cold kicked in. A quiet, peaceful weekend. No cities, no work, no noise. Just the woods, a cabin, some drinks, and some time away. We left early on a Friday morning. Luis drove, I rode shotgun, and the other two were in the back. The drive up was smooth, nothing crazy. We had music going, snacks packed, and Zach gave us some background on the cabin. He said it hadn't been used in a couple of years, but his uncle kept it stocked and checked on it every once in a while. No neighbors nearby, a private dirt road, and a small lake a few minutes walk behind it. We were all pumped to just get away. When we finally got there around 2 p.m., the place was exactly what I imagined. A single-story log cabin, a little worn around the edges, but solid. It was tucked into the trees with a small gravel area out front where we parked. The air smelled clean, crisp, and full of pine. Inside, the cabin had 2 bedrooms, a living room with an old couch and wood stove, a small kitchen, and a bathroom that worked on well water and a propane heater. There were some mouse droppings in a few corners, and it had that old wood smell, but nothing too bad. We unloaded our gear and supplies. Food, water, beer, firewood, sleeping bags, and started settling in. By the time evening came, we'd already cracked open a few beers, got a fire going outside, and were just enjoying the peace. No cell service, no lights from nearby houses, just stars, trees, and the crackle of the fire. Around midnight, we finally turned in. I took the pull-out couch. Zach and Jamal shared the bigger room. Luis had the smaller one. I remember laying there, listening to the silence. It was strange, but in a nice way. Total quiet, not even the hum of electricity. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight coming through the windows and the smell of coffee. Zach was in the kitchen boiling water over the gas stove. We ate simple granola bars, fruit, coffee, and then decided to go check out the lake Zach mentioned. It was about a 15-minute walk through the woods, downhill most of the way. We brought a couple of folding chairs, some beers in a cooler, and spent a few hours just sitting there. No one else around. It was so quiet that even the small splashes from the water sounded loud. That kind of quiet is rare. At some point, we talked about coming back the next summer with kayaks or maybe a fishing setup. On the walk back to the cabin, we noticed something weird. A thin line of blue plastic ribbon was tied around one of the trees near the path. Just one strip, maybe 3 feet off the ground. It wasn't there when we walked down. At least none of us remembered seeing it. It was old and faded, maybe surveyor's tape or something. We didn't think much of it, but Zach said it might have been left from when his uncle had work done out there a few years back. We moved on. That night, after grilling some burgers and sitting around the fire again, we started hearing noises in the woods. Not too close, but not far either. It sounded like snapping branches and movement, but not steady, like a few steps, then nothing. A few more, then silence again. Could have been a deer, maybe a bear. Zach reminded us that bears were a possibility up there. We weren't too worried. We had flashlights, knives, and the fire going. Still, I remember feeling a little more alert. I kept checking over my shoulder, listening harder than before. The woods at night feel different. It's not the same quiet as during the day. There's this pressure to it, like something's watching. We went inside around 11, locking the doors and windows, just in case. Everyone seemed a little quieter than the night before. I had trouble sleeping. I kept waking up thinking I'd heard something outside. At one point, I swore I heard gravel crunching. Just 1 or 2 steps, like someone was walking across the driveway. But when I sat up and looked out the window, there was nothing. I told myself it was probably an animal and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, things felt a little off. The cooler we left outside was moved. It wasn't open, just pushed a few feet from where we'd left it. Could have been an animal trying to get into it, but it hadn't been touched in any real way. It didn't have scratch marks or anything. We checked the edge of the woods but didn't see anything. No paw prints, no torn up ground. Just more quiet. Too quiet. Luis wanted to head out for a drive to get signal and check in with his girlfriend. Zach and Jamal went with him. I stayed behind. I just wanted some alone time, maybe a nap. I stayed on the couch for about an hour, reading one of the old magazines in the cabin, when I noticed something through the front window. It was far, but clear. Someone was standing at the tree line across the clearing, just standing, not moving, not facing the cabin directly, but off to the side. They were in dark clothes and had a hood or maybe a beanie on. I froze. I didn't move. I just stared. After what felt like minutes, they turned and walked into the woods. Not fast, not slow, just walked away. I jumped up, locked the door again even though it already was, and moved away from the window. My heart was pounding. I wasn't sure if I'd really seen what I thought I did. It didn't make sense. There shouldn't have been anyone out here. Zach said there were no neighbors close by. I stayed inside until the others came back, maybe 2 hours later. I didn't tell them. I didn't want to sound paranoid. We still had one more night left. I just told them I thought I heard something in the woods again, just to be safe. That night, we didn't do the fire. None of us said anything, but I think we all felt something was off. Instead, we stayed inside, played cards, drank a bit, and kept the lights on. Around 10 p.m., the power went out. Total darkness. Zach said the propane generator outside must have run out of fuel. He and Jamal went to check it. I went with them. Luis stayed inside. As we walked around back with flashlights, we saw it. The side window, one of the small ones near the kitchen, had a long, shallow crack in it, like it had been hit with a rock or something. Not broken all the way through, but cracked in a wide arc. We stared at it for a while. No one said anything. Jamal checked the generator. It was fine. Still had fuel. It hadn't been turned off, it had been unplugged. The heavy cord was pulled out and laying on the ground. It would have taken effort. It wasn't something that could fall out on its own. We plugged it back in, got the lights running, and went inside. This time I told them what I saw earlier. The figure, the person in the woods. No one laughed. No one doubted me. They just nodded. Jamal said he had a weird feeling earlier that day too, like someone had been watching us from the trees when we were down at the lake. We decided not to sleep. We sat together in the living room with the lights on, one flashlight each, and a few knives laid out on the table. We kept the front curtains closed but kept checking the windows. Every creak and groan of the cabin made us flinch. It was probably close to 3 a.m. when we finally saw it again. Movement outside, near the trees. A shape, then two people, just standing at the edge of the clearing. One had something slung over their shoulder. It looked like a bag. The other just stood still, facing the cabin. They didn't move. They didn't run. They didn't shout. Just stood there. Zach ran to the back room and grabbed a flare gun his uncle kept locked up. He fired it up through the chimney hole. The red light lit up the clearing for a few seconds. When we looked again, they were gone. That was enough. We packed our stuff in minutes, just essentials, and got in the car. We didn't bother cleaning or putting anything away. Luis drove like hell down the dirt road, headlights bouncing off trees, tires sliding in the gravel. We didn't speak until we hit the main road and got signal. We called the sheriff's office in encampment, told them everything. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but we never heard back. We never went back to that cabin. Zach's uncle put it up for sale that winter. We still talk sometimes, and we still take trips, but never to cabins and never out that far. The quiet doesn't feel peaceful anymore. It feels like something hiding. I still think about the way those people stood there, the way they didn't try to break in. They didn't try to hurt us. They just watched, like they were waiting for something. I wonder if they'd been out there the whole time, maybe even the first night. Maybe we just hadn't noticed. Maybe they were watching us from the trees, learning our patterns, figuring out how long they could wait. And I think about how we never found out who they were. No names, no faces, no motive. Just two silent figures in the woods. That's what sticks with me the most. the not knowing. It was late October 2019 when I decided to spend a weekend alone at a small cabin near the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. I was 32 at the time, working a remote IT job that had me staring at screens too much. I needed a break from the noise, the constant pressure, the city traffic, and just people in general. The cabin belonged to a friend of a friend, someone I didn't know personally, but he had offered to let me use it for a few days. All I had to do was bring my own supplies and clean up after myself. I left early Friday morning from Charlottesville, packed my car with canned food, water, a camp stove, a sleeping bag, a change of clothes, and my old hiking boots. It was raining steadily when I started the drive. The weather app had warned about showers and maybe even storms throughout the weekend, but I didn't care. In fact, I welcomed it. I figured the rain would keep others away and make the forest feel more peaceful. I was wrong. The drive took just over 2 hours. The roads grew narrower the deeper I went. Paved streets gave way to gravel, and the GPS lost signal about 10 miles from the cabin. I had printed out directions beforehand, just in case, and followed the winding dirt road until the trees thinned and I saw the place tucked between tall pines and oaks. The cabin was small, about the size of a mobile home. It had one bedroom, a little kitchen, a porch with an old rocking chair, and a storage shed behind it. The siding was faded, the paint chipped, but it looked solid. I parked a few feet from the front steps, grabbed my gear, and went inside. The place smelled of cedar and dust. The floorboards creaked underfoot. There was no electricity, just a wood-burning stove for heat and some battery lanterns for light. The rain picked up as I unpacked and set up my things. I boiled water on the stove for some instant noodles and stood by the small window, watching the gray forest shift in the wind. By nightfall, the rain had turned into a steady downpour. It tapped loudly against the roof and windows. I read for a while, then rolled out my sleeping bag in the bedroom and laid down. There was no cell service, no internet, nothing but the sound of rain and the groaning of trees outside. Sometime around midnight, I woke up, not fully awake, more like stirred. I heard something separate from the rain. A thump. Maybe? I held still, not sure if I'd imagined it. Then it came again, louder this time. A heavy thud, followed by what sounded like something brushing against the wall of the cabin. My first thought was a deer or bear, maybe rubbing against the siding. I stayed in my sleeping bag, heart beating a little faster now, and waited. More sounds followed. Something dragging, a light clunk, then silence. Just the rain again. I stayed awake for another hour, listening, eyes fixed on the dark ceiling. Eventually, I dozed off again. The next morning, the rain hadn't stopped. The forest outside looked pale and lifeless through the wet glass. I stepped onto the porch with my jacket and boots, coffee in hand, and looked around. The air was cold, and everything smelled like wet soil. I didn't see any animal tracks around the cabin, but then again, the mud was all churned up. Maybe whatever I'd heard was gone. Maybe I had imagined it. Still, I kept glancing over my shoulder the rest of the morning. I spent the day reading and jotting thoughts in a small notebook I'd brought. Around noon, I explored the shed behind the cabin. It had some old tools, a rusted axe, and a few cans of kerosene. Nothing unusual. The inside was dry, but the door creaked badly, and the hinges were rusted. I left it alone and went back inside. That afternoon, something happened that didn't sit right with me. I was sitting on the porch again, staring at the woods when I thought I saw movement. A figure maybe, or a shape, just far enough away that I couldn't tell if it was a person or a tree swaying oddly. It disappeared behind the ridge before I could really focus on it. I waited, eyes locked on the spot, but nothing came out. Could have been my imagination, I told myself. Light and shadow playing tricks. Still, I kept the cabin door locked after that, even though I knew no one was supposed to be around for miles. That night, the sounds came again. This time, it started with what I thought was knocking. 3 taps. Slow, heavy, then nothing. I sat up in the sleeping bag, fully awake now, and held my breath. I had no gun, just a hatchet I'd found in the shed. I got up slowly, grabbed the hatchet, and crept to the front room. I didn't switch on any lights. I stood by the window, peeking through the slit in the curtain. The rain blurred everything. Visibility was terrible. I thought I saw something move on the porch but couldn't be sure. Then, another sound, this time from the back. It wasn't knocking, it was footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps in wet leaves and mud. I turned toward the back door, heart pounding, ears straining. The footsteps stopped. I waited, not breathing, for several minutes. Nothing happened. Eventually, I returned to the bedroom, still holding the hatchet, and stayed awake until dawn. When daylight came, I walked the perimeter of the cabin. That's when I found the boot prints, deep in the mud, clear as day. Human, not mine. They circled the cabin. Twice. They led in from the woods behind the shed and disappeared back the same way. Someone had been walking around the cabin while I slept. I felt a wave of cold run through my chest. I packed my gear in a rush and threw it in the car. But when I tried to start the engine, the car wouldn't turn over. The battery was dead. I checked the hood. Everything looked fine, but I wasn't a mechanic. I tried again. Nothing. I was stuck. No phone signal. No way to call for help. I was about a 10-mile hike from the last paved road, and even that was likely empty. I had no choice but to wait it out. I spent the rest of that day sharpening the hatchet, keeping every window in sight. I didn't sit on the porch. I didn't leave the cabin. I moved the table in front of the front door and stacked some firewood by the back entrance. Not that it would do much good if someone really wanted in, but it made me feel a little less helpless. That night, the rain was worse. Thunder cracked in the distance. Wind blew hard against the windows. And then, just past midnight, the doorknob turned. Not jiggled, not bumped, turned. I saw it. I was sitting right there in the front room, watching it in the dark. It didn't open. I had locked it and braced the table against it, but someone had tried. Whoever it was didn't knock this time. No sounds. Just that single attempt. Then silence again. I waited there for hours, gripping the hatchet until my hands cramped. I didn't sleep. In the morning, I checked the door. Mud smeared on the handle. More boot prints on the porch. I checked the shed again. This time, it was open. The axe was gone. The realization hit me like a punch in the stomach. I hadn't taken it out. I had left it leaning against the wall. Now it was missing. Whoever was walking around the cabin had taken it. I didn't eat that day. My stomach was tight. I thought about walking, but the idea of being out in the woods, exposed, made me feel worse than being inside. I stayed close to the fire, listening, watching. That evening, just before it got dark, I heard movement again, closer than before. I looked through the back window and saw someone, a man, standing near the tree line. He was wearing a hood or a hat, I couldn't tell, but he was facing the cabin. Not moving, just standing there. I stared for what felt like minutes. He didn't come closer, just stood. Eventually, he disappeared back into the trees. That night, I stayed in the corner of the room with the hatchet and a kitchen knife, both in reach. I didn't sleep. The rain kept falling, the wind howled, and every creak of the wood felt like footsteps. But nothing else happened. By morning, the rain had lightened into a mist. I opened the door and stepped out, soaked to the knees within seconds. I needed to get out. I didn't care about the car anymore. I packed a backpack with water, a little food, the knife, the hatchet, and started walking. I followed the dirt road in the direction I'd come in from. The mud made it hard, but I kept going. I didn't see anyone behind me, no sign of the man, but I didn't stop. After a few miles, I found a signal on my phone. One tiny bar, enough to text a friend and drop a location pin. An hour later, a local sheriff's deputy found me walking along the road. I told him everything. He didn't say much, just nodded and helped me to the station. They sent someone to check the cabin. The shed was empty. The axe wasn't there. The prints were washed out by then, mostly gone. They never found the man. I don't know who he was. I don't know if he was living out there or just watching from the woods. But I know this, he wasn't there by accident. and he wanted in. I never went back to that cabin, never even asked about it again. I still don't sleep well during storms, and every time I hear a knock or a creak in the middle of the night, I remember that door handle. It was late September of 2018 when I decided to take some time off from everything. I had just turned 35 and had been working construction jobs nonstop for over a year. I lived alone in Tulsa, Oklahoma. No wife, no kids. Just work, bills, and the occasional beer to quiet down the days. My body was starting to feel it. Knees hurt more in the morning. Hands were stiff. Neck and shoulders always tight. I needed a break, not the kind where you stay home and scroll through your phone, but the kind where you go off the grid for a while. Somewhere quiet. I found a listing online for a small off-the-path cabin about 30 miles east of Fayetteville, Arkansas. The pictures showed a small, single-floor wooden cabin with an old stove, a cot, and a small kitchen. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal. There was a hand pump out front for water and a wood stove for heat. What caught my attention was the listing's last note. Asterisk, secluded, quiet, bordering historic graveyard. Perfect for solitude. Asterisk, that graveyard part should have stopped me. Didn't. I had always been okay with graveyards. Never saw them as scary. Just part of life. If anything, I figured it would keep other people away. And I needed that. Just me and my thoughts. I booked the place for a full week. I packed light. Mostly canned food, a flashlight, a small hatchet, a first aid kit, and a sleeping bag. I also brought a basic emergency radio that ran on batteries. Didn't expect to need it, but old habits from years of camping die hard. I left Tulsa early on a Friday morning. The drive was easy until I got off the main highway and started following the gravel roads deeper into the hills. Trees started to crowd the road. The gravel gave way to a thinner, bumpier dirt path. No signs, no traffic. It was late afternoon when I pulled up in front of the cabin. It looked like the photos, but older. Logs darker, chipping in some places. The small front porch leaned slightly. A single rocking chair sat at an angle like someone had just left it. The graveyard was maybe 50 yards to the left of the cabin, partly hidden by trees. I could see the older-style headstones, tall and thin with rounded tops. Some were leaning, others nearly swallowed by grass and dirt. I unpacked, locked up my truck, and got settled inside. The cabin had a strange smell. Not bad, just musty, like dry rot and dust. I opened the windows to let air through and wiped down the surfaces with some cleaner I'd packed. There were no curtains on the windows, which made the place feel open in a way I didn't like, especially at night. But I didn't come out there to feel cozy. That first night was quiet. Too quiet. No engine sounds, no planes, no people. Just wind through trees and the occasional crack of something settling. I made a simple dinner of beans and cornbread I'd packed in a tin. Read by lantern light for a bit, then went to bed on the cot. The mattress was thin and springy. I could feel the metal through it, but I was tired enough not to care. I woke up sometime after midnight. No reason I could name. The lantern was out. The cabin was pitch black. Took a moment to remember where I was. That kind of dark makes your brain grab for familiar things that aren't there. I sat up and listened. Wind, nothing else. But something felt off, like I had been dreaming about something just out of reach. I shook it off, used the bucket in the corner for the bathroom, and laid back down. The next morning, I made coffee over the wood stove and sat out on the porch. The graveyard looked different in daylight, more detailed. I could see the wrought iron fence around it, parts of it broken or bent. It was larger than I first thought, maybe an acre in size. Some of the headstones looked old, like pre-Civil War old. One section had stone crosses. Another had markers that had fallen completely over. There were no flowers, no signs that anyone came to visit. Later that afternoon, I walked through it, just looking. Some headstones had dates from the 1800s. A few had only first names. Elias, Rebecca. One had no name, just the year 1861. I found a cluster of smaller stones that might have been children. Most were too weathered to read. No recent burials, no maintenance, just time and decay. It was strange to stand among so much forgotten history, but it didn't scare me. Not yet. That night it rained. Not hard, but steady enough to drown out the usual forest sounds. I laid awake longer than the night before. The rain tapped on the roof like fingers. I kept thinking about the graveyard. I wasn't afraid of ghosts or anything like that. It was the fact that no one came out here. No one had tended to that place in decades. No flowers, no signs of ceremony. Just long-forgotten bones in the dirt next to the place I was sleeping. I don't know what woke me again, but it was late, still raining. I sat up and looked at the window facing the graveyard. I couldn't see much, just black trees and the occasional glint of water on glass. But there was a shape, low to the ground. First, I thought it was a deer, but it didn't move like one. It stood still for too long, just hunched there, barely moving. Then it was gone. I told myself I imagined it. Probably a branch or shadow. The mind plays tricks in the dark. Still, I kept the hatchet by the bed that night. The next day, I checked the ground near the graveyard. The rain had turned the dirt soft. I thought maybe I'd see tracks. Deer prints, raccoon, anything. But there was nothing, just wet leaves. I figured if it had been something big, I would have seen signs. Around noon, I hiked a bit down the path beyond the cabin. The forest opened up in parts to rolling hills and old barbed wire fences. I didn't go far, just enough to get a sense of the place. I didn't see any other houses or cabins. No hunters, no campers, no tire marks. It was like the world stopped just beyond where I was. When I got back to the cabin, I noticed something odd. The rocking chair on the porch was facing the opposite direction than I remembered. I hadn't touched it. That made my skin crawl a little. That evening, I built a small fire outside. Just wanted to sit and watch the flames for a while. I kept looking over at the graveyard. Nothing moved, but it felt different now. Heavier. I didn't eat much that night. Just sat out there until the fire died. Then went inside and locked the door. It rained again that night. Heavier this time. The wind picked up. I could hear branches hitting the roof. I was tired, but I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something. Not the rain, not the wind. A thud, heavy, followed by another, and another, not like footsteps, more like something being dragged. It was coming from the back of the cabin. Then silence. I waited. Nothing. I got up and crept toward the back window. Wiped the fog off with my sleeve. I couldn't see much through the rain, but there was a shape again. Closer now. Lower. Still. Like someone crouching. I backed away and picked up the flashlight. Turned it on and shined it out the window. Nothing. Just trees and rain. But when I turned around, I noticed something on the floor. Mud. A long, wet streak across the wooden boards, leading from the back door toward the front. I hadn't heard the door open. But there it was. I checked the front door. Still locked. Same with the back. All the windows were shut. There was no way someone had been inside. But the mud was real. I could see the leaves stuck in it. I used a rag to wipe it up and tried to calm myself down. I stayed up until morning. The next day, I hiked down the path again. This time farther. Hoping maybe I'd run into a ranger station or some other person. I didn't. Just more trees. I came across what looked like an old barn about a mile out. Roof caved in, walls leaning. Inside was a rusted tractor and piles of broken tools. Looked like no one had been there in decades. When I got back to the cabin, the rocking chair was gone. Not moved. Gone. I walked around the cabin twice. Nothing. That chair was heavy. No way it just blew away. I didn't know what to think anymore. I wanted to leave, but the thought of driving that narrow path at night in the rain made me hesitate. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up with the hatchet in my lap and the flashlight next to me. The rain had stopped, but the wind hadn't. Around midnight, I heard it again. Dragging. Closer. Louder. Then scratching at the back wall. Slow, like fingernails or something metal. I stood up and moved toward the noise. It stopped. I turned off the lantern and waited. Silence. Then I heard the front porch creak. Slow. Deliberate. One step. Then another. I held my breath. There were no windows facing the porch. I couldn't see what was there, but it stayed. For a long time, I could hear the wind, but not whatever it was. Then the creaking stopped. I waited until dawn before opening the door. The chair was back. Same position as the first day. Clean, dry. Not a drop of water or I was 31 the summer I decided to take a break from Paris and spend 2 weeks in the Cévennes. I'd been working too much, barely sleeping, and my doctor told me I needed time away from screens, people, and especially the city. I wasn't depressed exactly, but I wasn't far from it either. Burned out. That was a better word. So I rented this old cabin I found online through a small property site. It was tucked away in the mountains, near a village called Bar-de-Cévennes, which maybe has a few hundred people. The listing said it was rustic, private, surrounded by forest trails. I took the train as far as Alès, rented a small Peugeot, and drove another hour and a half through narrow winding roads until I reached the place. The sun was low when I arrived, casting long shadows through the pines. There was no driveway, just a small shoulder on the road with a faded trail disappearing into the woods. I had to carry my bags down a rocky slope for maybe 10 minutes until I saw the roof of the cabin through the trees. It was smaller than I expected and older too, made of dark stone and wood with a sagging metal roof. One chimney, no visible power lines. There was no key, just a metal latch on the door and a note left by the owner under a flat rock on the step. The note was in French and basically said, "No plumbing, no electricity. Collect your water from the spring 200 meters west. Use candles. Enjoy." I'd expected that, so I brought supplies. Water jugs, a flashlight, food that didn't need much cooking, books, a sleeping bag, first aid, even a solar charger for emergencies. I didn't think I'd need it. The first night was quiet. I made a small fire in the old iron stove inside, read until I was tired, and went to sleep early. There was no signal for my phone, which was fine. That was the point. The cabin had one main room and a tiny back corner with a compost toilet, half covered by a hanging curtain. Everything smelled like wood smoke and damp earth, but not in a bad way. There was a little table, one chair, and a narrow sleeping cot with a wool blanket. I didn't mind the discomfort. Felt good to be alone. The first few days went the way I wanted. I hiked during the day, found the spring and filled my jugs, picked wild thyme, wrote in a notebook I hadn't touched in years. I cooked canned lentils and sardines on a camp stove and ate outside. I saw a fox one morning, heard wild boars rustling around at night. I was starting to feel normal again, calm, focused. Then, on the fourth night, I woke up around 3 a.m. because I thought I heard something outside the cabin. Not an animal sound, a dull scraping like wood dragging across stone. I sat up and listened. The fire had died, and the room was cold and dark except for faint moonlight through the small window. I stayed still for at least 5 minutes, heart beating in my ears. Nothing, just whined through trees and creaking branches. I told myself it was probably a branch falling or a wild pig rubbing against a rock. I forced myself to lie back down, but I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I walked around the cabin to see if I could find anything strange. At first, there was nothing. Then I noticed that one of the small firewood logs I'd stacked near the wall was lying about 5 meters away, on the path I used to get to the spring. That wasn't right. I remembered lining them up tightly in a pyramid. I chalked it up to wind or maybe an animal, though it was a heavy piece of wood. Either way, I felt uneasy. Not scared exactly, not yet, just unsettled. That day, I hiked longer than usual to get my mind off it. There was a trail that led up to a ridge with a view of the valley. You could see the occasional stone farmhouse or sheep pasture below, but not much else. When I came back, it was close to sunset, and the forest had that golden haze to it. I was starting to feel better again, until I reached the cabin. Someone had moved the chair. It was inside when I left. I remembered clearly because I had placed my flashlight and notebook on it before heading out. Now it was outside on the front step, facing the trees. The notebook was still on it. Flashlight too. My chest felt tight. I scanned the woods in all directions. Nothing moved. No sound except for wind in the leaves. I stood completely still for a long time, trying to convince myself it was an animal somehow. But animals don't move furniture, and no one else was supposed to be here. I went inside and locked the door. I didn't light a fire. I didn't eat. I just lay on the cot fully clothed, holding the flashlight in one hand and a small utility knife in the other. I stared at the ceiling, listening. I heard twigs snap a few times. I heard something rustling in the leaves behind the cabin, but it didn't come closer. Eventually, exhaustion won and I fell asleep. The next morning, I decided to hike back to the car. I wasn't planning to leave yet. I just wanted to check it. I wanted to see if anything around it had changed. It was exactly the way I left it. I almost convinced myself I was overreacting. But then I saw the dirt around the back bumper. There were boot prints. They weren't mine. Mine had come from the front, from where I parked and unloaded. These were behind the car, coming from the woods, then circling around it. I stood there staring at them, unsure what to do. They weren't deep, maybe made the day before when the soil was still a bit wet from rain. I started walking back fast. Every few minutes, I looked over my shoulder. I didn't hear anything, but my mind kept replaying the sound I'd heard at night, that dragging, scraping sound. I made it back to the cabin and immediately started packing my bag. I figured I'd sleep one more night, hike to the car in the morning, and drive out. I didn't sleep. That night, something knocked on the cabin. Not a tree branch, not an animal. It was sharp and clear. 3 knocks on the wooden door. I sat up fast and turned on the flashlight. Nothing in the window. I didn't move for hours, just sat there, shaking, knife in hand. I kept the light off most of the time, turning it on only when I thought I heard something. At some point close to morning, I must have blacked out from fear and exhaustion. I woke up when it was already bright outside. No sounds, no movement. I opened the door slowly and stepped out. Everything looked normal, except for the second chair. It was sitting next to the original one just outside the cabin, facing the same direction, toward the trees. It was one of the old kitchen chairs from inside. Someone had taken it out during the night and placed it perfectly beside the other. I hadn't heard the door open. I checked the latch. It wasn't broken, but maybe it hadn't been locked well, or maybe they were quiet. I ran. I didn't take the bags, just my water, wallet, and the keys. I sprinted to the car, practically sliding down the path. I started the engine and tore down the narrow road, not even checking the mirrors. I drove all the way back to Alesh, straight to the nearest police station. They filed a report but didn't seem interested. The officer said people trespass sometimes. Squatters, bored locals, even other hikers. He told me that if nothing was stolen, there wasn't much they could do. He was polite, but it was clear he thought I was overreacting. I never went back to get my things. The rental owner messaged me a week later saying he found the cabin empty, with everything inside. He didn't mention the chairs. A month later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was my notebook, the one I'd left on the chair, and a photograph tucked inside the first page. The photo showed the cabin. It was taken from the woods, maybe 30 meters back. I could see the door, both chairs, and me standing in the doorway holding the flashlight. I don't remember anyone taking that photo. That's when I moved back in with my sister for a while. That was 9 years ago, and I've never gone back to the save-in. I still think about it sometimes when I can't sleep. I think about the chairs. I think about the sound of the knocks. And I always come back to the same question. How long had they been watching? My name's Ben Kramer. I'm 32 years old now, but this happened when I was 28. I live in San Diego, and I used to work in a fast-paced marketing firm downtown. Back then, everything felt like it was always going 100 miles an hour. Phones ringing, people rushing, traffic, deadlines, back-to-back meetings. I started feeling burnt out. My hands would shake for no reason, and some mornings I'd feel my heart beating too fast even before I got out of bed. I knew I needed a break from the city, A coworker told me about a small off-grid cabin he had rented before out in rural Oregon, near a place called Hines, not far from Burns. It wasn't listed on Airbnb or anything. It was owned by a retired guy named Marcus who rented it by word of mouth. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, just trees, fields, and quiet. I jumped on it. A long weekend alone sounded perfect. I booked 4 nights in mid-September and drove up with just a few bags, some food, and a sleeping bag. No gun, no dog, just me. It was a long drive. I left San Diego around 5 in the morning and didn't get there until almost midnight. The last couple hours were rough. Pitch black roads with no streetlights, and Google Maps lost the signal halfway through. I had to rely on a printed direction sheet Marcus had emailed me the week before. I remember passing maybe 3 houses total in the last hour. One had a rusted-out school bus in the yard. Another had lights on but no cars parked outside. The last one had a barbed wire fence and what looked like an old livestock pen behind it. The road to the cabin was just a gravel track with grass growing up the middle. The directions said to look for a bent mailbox nailed to a pine tree with M7 scratched into the side. I missed it on the first pass and had to turn around. When I finally found it, I drove a good mile down that gravel road. Trees on both sides, no lights, the kind of dark that makes you feel like the world stops 5 feet past your headlights. The cabin itself wasn't fancy, just a 1-story, square-shaped building made of faded gray wood with a rusted tin roof. There was a small deck out front with 2 broken chairs and a gas grill. No power lines. The instructions said there was a generator, but not to use it unless I really needed to. Inside, it had a tiny kitchen with a propane stove, a small bathroom with a compost toilet, and 1 main room with a wood stove, a twin bed, and a desk under the window. I lit the oil lamps inside and sat down in silence. For the first time in months, I didn't hear traffic, phones, or voices, just the wind in the trees. I slept like a rock that night. The next morning, I made eggs on the stove and drank coffee on the deck. I could see deer trails weaving through the tall grass past the edge of the clearing. Beyond that, there were trees as far as I could see. Dense old forest. No phone signal, no internet, just me and the woods. It was exactly what I needed. That afternoon, I walked around the property. Marcus said it was 20 acres, mostly woods. I didn't plan to hike much, but I wanted to get a lay of the land. I followed a narrow dirt path through the trees for maybe 20 minutes until I came to a clearing with an old wooden shed. It was gray and weather-beaten, with part of the roof caved in. Nothing around it. No trail markers, no fencing. Just sitting there in the trees. I didn't go in, just peeked through the cracks. Looked like old tools. Shovels, a rusty wheelbarrow, a stack of rotting firewood. One corner had what looked like a large blue tarp bundled up with something under it. I figured it was junk. I wasn't there to snoop. I walked back. The first 2 nights were peaceful. I read, cooked, made a small fire in the wood stove, and wrote in a journal. I even started to feel the tension in my chest ease up. But on the 3rd night, things changed. It was around 9 p.m. I had just cleaned up dinner and stepped outside to use the outhouse near the tree line. That's when I saw something out in the field, maybe 100 feet away. It was a person, just standing there, not moving, no flashlight, no sound. I froze. My mind didn't know how to process it at first. I thought maybe it was a hunter or a neighbor, but no one was supposed to be on the property. I didn't move. I just stood behind the outhouse, hidden in the shadows, watching. After a minute or so, the figure walked slowly back into the trees. Not hurried, just slow and deliberate, like they weren't in any rush. I waited another 10 minutes before I stepped out and walked quietly back to the cabin. I locked the door for the first time since I arrived. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak in the wood, every gust of wind felt like something moving outside. I sat on the edge of the bed with the oil lamp burning low beside me and the fire crackling in the stove. No gun, no cell service. I kept thinking, who the hell would be out there in the dark, standing still like that? The next morning, I tried to tell myself I imagined it. Maybe it was a trick of the shadows or a deer standing upright or something. I went out to the spot where I'd seen the figure. The grass was disturbed, flattened, like someone had stood there, but there weren't any clear footprints. It had rained a little the night before, so maybe they'd washed away. I walked the tree line but didn't find anything else. No trash, no tracks, nothing. I went back and stayed close to the cabin. That day passed slowly. I kept looking out the windows, waiting to see someone again. I left the lamps burning even during the afternoon, just to feel less alone. I skipped dinner. I didn't feel like eating. Around sunset, I heard something that made my skin crawl. It was a knock. 3 slow knocks on the back wall of the cabin. Not the door, the wall. I froze. I couldn't move at first. I was sitting on the bed, reading with my legs under the blanket. The knock came again 3 times. Deliberate, not wood creaking, not branches tapping. Knocks. I stood up, grabbed the fireplace poker, and moved slowly toward the back wall. There was no window on that side, just the wall behind the kitchen counter. I held my breath and waited. Nothing else happened. No more knocks, no footsteps. I didn't go outside. I didn't even check. I just waited. I sat in the middle of the room, staring at the front door, gripping that poker like it would help. I stayed awake the entire night, listening. At some point near dawn, I fell asleep sitting up. When I woke up, the sky was gray and cold. I checked outside. No signs of anyone. No footprints. No broken branches. Just the same quiet trees and grass. I packed up right then. My plan was to leave a day early. I stuffed everything into the trunk of my car, locked the cabin, and started down the gravel road. The plan was simple. Get to town, find a gas station, and get back to the highway. I had maybe half a tank left. About a mile down the road, I saw tire tracks in the dirt that hadn't been there before. Big ones, probably a truck. They came from somewhere off to the right, where there wasn't supposed to be a road. I slowed down, looked, and saw a narrow track cutting through the grass. It wasn't on any map. I almost kept driving, but curiosity got me. I backed up, turned, and followed it. The track led through the trees for maybe 200 yards before it opened into a clearing. That's where I saw the shed again. The same one from before. Only this time, the door was wide open, and there was a truck parked next to it. A dark green pickup with no plates. I stopped the car and killed the engine. I don't know why I didn't drive away. I just sat there, staring at the truck. Something felt wrong. I got out quietly and moved closer. The truck was old but looked well maintained. Clean windows, new tires. The back was empty except for a rope, a shovel, and a dirty blanket. I walked toward the shed. Inside, it looked different, cleaner. The tools were organized now. The tarp in the corner was gone. In its place was a large blue cooler with a padlock on it. There was a chair next to it, a single metal folding chair facing the cooler. I didn't go further. I backed out, got in my car, and left. I made it to town an hour later, heart pounding the whole time. I didn't stop until I was back on the main highway. At the first gas station, I told the cashier everything I'd seen. He gave me a strange look and said I should talk to the sheriff. I did. They took a report, asked questions, and promised to check it out. I never heard back from them. I emailed Marcus a few days later to ask about the shed and the truck. He didn't respond. I tried calling. The number was disconnected. I looked up the property on satellite maps. You can see the cabin, but the clearing with the shed is covered by trees. No visible path, like it's been hidden. I don't know what was in that cooler. I don't want to know, but I think about it more than I'd like to admit. I quit my job a few months later, moved out of San Diego. I live near Flagstaff now, work remotely, and spend more time outdoors, but never alone. Never without a phone. And I never go anywhere I can't walk away from fast. That cabin was supposed to be a break from stress. I was 36 when I decided to rent that cabin deep in the northern woods of Montana. It was October of 2022, right at the point where the leaves turn dry and the mornings feel like they're warning you of the cold that's coming. I had been working from home for over a year and my brain just needed something else. Something quiet, isolated, something that didn't come with the buzz of streetlights and the soft hum of neighbors' televisions through the walls. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to hear a single engine, or a plane overhead, or someone knocking on my door. Just trees, wind, and my own heartbeat. I found the place on an old listing site, one of those rentals that didn't seem to pop up on big platforms. The cabin wasn't huge, but it had everything I thought I needed. One bedroom, a small kitchen, a decent-sized living room with an old wood stove, and a porch that faced the trees like a silent lookout post. No internet, no cell service. The owner left a handwritten note in the mailbox near the front gate with directions on how to use the wood stove, where to find the breaker box, and a reminder to check the generator every 2 days. The power grid didn't stretch out to that area anymore. According to the letter, the county had stopped maintaining that region 5 or 6 years ago. That was perfect for me. I arrived mid-afternoon in my gray pickup with all the gear I thought I might need. Canned food, tools, a few gallons of water, a heavy-duty sleeping bag, and a stack of books I'd been pretending I'd read one day. There was a weird satisfaction in unpacking everything into the small cabin. It made me feel like I was setting up a new life, one that didn't need deadlines or meetings. The first 2 days were calm, even beautiful. I split wood behind the cabin, sipped black coffee on the porch, and watched squirrels scramble through the undergrowth. At night, the sky exploded with stars. I had never seen a sky that black, that open. It was the kind of night that made you feel like a kid again, scared but curious. But it was the third night when things started to feel off. Around midnight, I woke up. Not from a nightmare. I just woke up, wide awake. My body felt tight, like I'd heard something but couldn't remember what. I stayed still in bed for a minute, letting my eyes adjust. The room was pitch black, except for a sliver of moonlight cutting through the gap in the curtain. Everything was quiet, like the forest itself had paused. I figured maybe I'd heard a branch snap, or maybe the wind. The stove had gone out, so I was a little cold, which didn't help. I got up, threw on my jacket, and walked to the front window. I pressed my face to the cold glass and looked out. Nothing, just trees, a few feet of gravel path, my truck sitting still. But then I noticed something odd. There were marks in the gravel right in front of the porch. Long, curved marks like someone had dragged something heavy. I couldn't remember them being there the day before. Could have been a raccoon, or a deer maybe. I told myself it was probably something normal. Still, I didn't sleep well after that. The next morning, I walked outside to take a closer look. The marks were real, not deep but definite. They curved around the front porch, then disappeared into the trees to the west. I followed them a few yards before they vanished into undergrowth. I stood there for a bit, trying to shake the unease crawling up my spine. That day, I stayed close to the cabin. Didn't chop wood, didn't walk the trail behind the property. Just read inside and kept the stove burning. I started locking the front and back door, even though I hadn't bothered the first couple nights. The fifth night was worse. I was sleeping lightly when I heard the sound. It was sharp, fast, like a knock, not on the front door, on the wall. 3 knocks, slow, steady. I sat up in bed and waited. Nothing. Then it happened again. 3 more, this time from the back wall. My throat tightened. I reached under the bed where I'd kept a crowbar I'd brought along, just in case. I gripped it hard and stepped out into the hallway. I didn't have a flashlight, just the little lantern on the side table. I carried it into the kitchen and stopped near the back door. Silence. I pressed my ear against the wall. Nothing. Then a thud. From the roof. I nearly dropped the lantern. I stepped back, looking up like I expected the ceiling to break open. But there was nothing. Just that awful weight of not knowing what was out there. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of the cabin. No footprints. No marks. The roof looked untouched. But there were more drag lines in the gravel. Not fresh, but not old either. They curled around the front again, then disappeared the same direction as before, into the woods to the west. I followed them farther this time, maybe 200 feet. That's when I found it. Tarp. Dirty, half covered in leaves. I pulled it up with a stick. It smelled like rust and damp wood. Underneath, there were a few wooden boards, stained and cracked. Some kind of makeshift sled, I guessed. No wheels, no frame, just crude, tied planks. I dropped it and walked back to the cabin. That was enough. I had planned to stay 2 weeks, but I decided I'd leave the next morning. Something was wrong with this place. Not haunted, not cursed, just not safe. That night, I barely slept. I left the lantern on, crowbar next to me, bag packed. At around 3 a.m., I heard it again. This time, it was on the porch. Footsteps, slow, heavy. I couldn't move. I just stared at the bedroom door. The footsteps stopped right outside. I didn't breathe. A long pause. Then, the doorknob rattled. Not turning, not forced. Just tested. As if someone or something was checking if it was locked. I gripped the crowbar so hard my fingers hurt. No sound for maybe 10 minutes. Then a low thud. Something was placed gently on the porch, followed by slow, retreating footsteps. Gravel crunching, fading into the distance. I stayed like that until the sun broke through the window. I didn't even check. I just loaded my truck and left. Didn't eat, didn't make coffee. Just left. But before I drove off, I glanced back at the porch. There was something sitting there. I got out, stepped closer. It was a small wooden box, handmade, about the size of a loaf of bread. No lock. I opened it slowly. Inside, wrapped in dirty cloth, was a single boot. A hiking boot, torn, stained, and a photo. It was faded, but you could still see the image. A man, smiling, standing in front of what looked like the same cabin. His arm around a woman. Both looked happy, relaxed. On the back of the photo, written in pen, it said, Jacob and Laura, October 2018. Last trip. I took the photo, left the box. I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't want to know. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe someone wanted to be found. Or remembered. I drove 8 hours that day, only stopping for gas. When I got home, I locked the door, shut all the windows, and slept with the lights on for a week. I still have that photo. It sits in a drawer under my socks. I don't look at it often, but sometimes, when the house is quiet and the wind hits the side of the building just right, I think about that cabin, about the marks in the gravel, about the box, and about how I wasn't the first one there, and maybe not the last. I was 27 when I decided to spend a weekend alone in an old cabin I inherited from my uncle. It was tucked away in the mountains of northern Idaho, near a place called Clark Fork. He passed away the year before, and while most of his estate was settled quickly, this cabin remained untouched. My uncle was a reclusive man, and most of the family didn't even know he owned property out there. He never married, didn't have kids, and rarely spoke about his past. So the cabin came as a surprise. I wasn't particularly close to him, but something about the place intrigued me. I drove up from Spokane on a Friday morning in early October. The air was already crisp, with fog clinging to the road as I wound through the forested hills. It took about 5 hours to reach the cabin, the last stretch being a rutted dirt path barely wide enough for my Jeep. The trees grew thick, the forest swallowing the sky in places. Cell service dropped off completely once I passed an old, rusted gate that marked the edge of the property. From there, it was another 20-minute crawl before the cabin came into view. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. A squat, single-story structure with gray-brown logs and a sloping mossy roof. A porch sagged slightly in front, and a chimney rose from one side, capped with a bird's nest. Dead leaves blanketed the ground. I parked beside a crumbling stone well and stepped out. The air was silent, not quiet, silent. No birdsong, no wind, no distant rustle of wildlife. It was like the world had paused around this one forgotten spot. The key worked, though it took a few firm twists to unlock the swollen wooden door. Inside, the cabin was musty and dark, lit only by what sunlight filtered through the dust-caked windows. Cobwebs draped the corners. The furniture was old but intact. A small table, a sagging couch, a few chairs, a wood stove. I found shelves lined with yellowed books, some tools, canned food so old the labels had faded to blank white. In the back was a single bedroom with a bare mattress and a chest at the foot of the bed. I spent most of that first day cleaning. I opened windows to air the place out, swept up mouse droppings and dead leaves, and cleared away nests from the eaves. I had brought my own supplies, a sleeping bag, food, water, flashlight, tools. I checked the wood stove and flew. Amazingly, it still drew well. By dusk, I had a small fire going. I ate some cold soup from a can, drank bottled water, and sat by the fire wrapped in my jacket. The silence pressed against the walls, broken only by the pop of the fire. That night was the first time I felt something was off. I was lying in my sleeping bag, trying to sleep, when I heard what I thought was footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate crunches in the leaves. I held my breath. There were no windows on the back wall, just thick log. The sounds came and went, and then it was quiet again. I told myself it was just an animal. Maybe a deer, maybe a bear. I slept badly. Every noise seemed amplified. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, something thumping against the wall once. I didn't sleep more than a couple hours. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of the cabin. I didn't see any tracks. The ground was dry, covered in leaves, so maybe they didn't leave impressions. Still, it bothered me. I decided to explore the nearby woods a bit, see if there were any signs of other people around. I didn't go far, maybe a mile in any direction. I found nothing, no campsites, no litter, no paths. It was like no one had stepped foot out here in years. Around midday, I checked out the well. The stone ring was moss-covered and crumbling, but the wooden cover lifted with a creak. I tied a heavy rock to some rope and lowered it. Took a long time to hit the bottom. No splash, just a dull thud. Dry. I left it open to air out. Later that afternoon, I noticed something strange on the inside of the door. Scratches. Deep, parallel gouges near the bottom, as if something had tried to claw its way in. Or out. I hadn't noticed them before. I ran my fingers over them. They were old. No fresh wood shavings or splinters. Still, it gave me a chill. That evening, I made another fire and ate a granola bar for dinner. I read one of the books I'd found, a journal, maybe. The handwriting was neat but slanted. It wasn't dated, but it looked old. Most of it was mundane, notes about weather, hunting, growing vegetables. But there were odd lines too. Heard the steps again last night. They come around 3. Always the same path. Always counterclockwise. It doesn't enter. Never has. But I think it's watching. I won't light the lamp anymore. I don't want it to see me. I stopped reading. That night, I barely slept at all. The footsteps came again, slow, circling the cabin. I didn't light the lamp either. Just lay there, heart pounding, listening. Once, I thought I saw a shape move past the window, but I didn't check. I just waited for morning. The third day, I was done. I packed up everything, made sure the fire was dead out, and loaded the Jeep. Before I left, I took the journal. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself it was real. Maybe I thought it would help me understand what my uncle had gone through. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. Just trees. No movement. But that silence clung to me like fog. Back home, I researched the area. The land was never registered under my uncle's name. No records of ownership. No property taxes paid. I asked around. No one had heard of the cabin. It wasn't on any maps I could find. I don't know what that place was. I never went back. I still have the journal, but I haven't opened it again. And every October, without fail, I wake up at 3 a.m., heart racing. Sure, I hear footsteps outside my window, but there's never anything there. Just silence.